If you look up the word preservation in the dictionary, you'll find that it means to protect, to keep safe, to guard. Hi, I'm Alan Smith. When we think of preserving the past, one of the first things that may come to mind is a historic building like this, or a document, or even furniture. And while maintaining these treasures is certainly a worthwhile and daunting task, preserving our gardens and gardening traditions can be even more challenging. How do the people charged with the task of restoring a garden that's been lost for decades or even centuries hope to achieve their goal? If the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, we must start our journey through garden history where it began, in the Old World. Today, we're going to travel to Holland and visit the grand garden of the Palace Het Loo, where royalty and aristocrats marveled at its many splendors. Also while in the Netherlands, we'll surround ourselves in a sea of blooms as we tour Kaukenhof gardens, where the rich Dutch tradition of the display garden is carried on to magnificent effect. We'll follow the legacy of Holland's King William across the pond to historic Colonial Williamsburg, where America's early gardening heritage is being painstakingly maintained. And we'll visit with a woman whose courageous efforts to maintain a simple grove of trees has helped preserve King William's namesake, the monarch butterfly. So stay with us. A teacher of mine once gave me an analogy about garden design. He said that the great painters of the world studied the works of other painters and learned from them. And the same could be applied about learning to be a better garden designer. One of the best examples of garden design is right here in the Netherlands. These are the grounds of the Palace Het Loo. This is a superb restoration of a 17th century garden. And the design is so elaborate, you might say it's fit for a king. Wies Erklins, the conservator here at Het Loo, takes us on a tour of the grounds and explains just what went into such a massive project. The restoration here is one of the most elaborate I've ever seen. I mean, it's quite extensive.
Well, for Holland, it's a very large restoration, and there was a lot of discussion also about when it started.
Yeah.
And because in '71 it was decided that the Royal Palace would become a museum, and then they started to think about restoration, and then research was done for about 5 years, and the actual restoration started in '77, and it was decided to restore the palace in the Baroque style, in the style of the 17th and 18th century, and also of the style in which it was built originally by King William III. And the architect who did the restoration, he said, well, if I restore a Baroque palace, I should also restore the garden, because otherwise it's only half a job.
And I understand the cost was around, in the 70s, about 40 million American dollars.
Yeah, the whole restoration, that's including the palace and the refurnishing as a museum and the restoration of the garden. This in the 19th century was what we call a landscape garden, English landscape garden. In the early 19th century, Louis Napoleon, the brother of Napoleon, lived in this palace. And a geometrical garden like this was old-fashioned at that time. And before we started restoration, we tried excavations to find look for the foundations of the fountains And then we found already some mosaics of the fountain.
So there was a great deal of
There was a
archaeology
great deal of
done.
archaeology, yes.
Yeah. I noticed that most of the parterres here, these fancy arabesque patterns, are made of boxwood.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
One of the problems now is the clipping of the boxwood, and that was also done by a hand, and now they're trying to have a kind of machinery with a laser.
Oh gosh,
to
to
get
keep
it, to
keep the levels just right.
Just
Yeah.
right, yes.
Because I would think
exactly.
the precision with which they have to prune all of the boxwood hedges must be amazing.
Well, it must be, and if you don't do it accurately, then the whole garden
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
The harmony
No,
that you sense with this doesn't work.
It has to be very accurate.
I think one of the most striking things to me about this garden is the embankment of turf that goes around three sides of it.
Yes. Well, that's exceptional for Dutch gardens because because there's so much water in Holland, most of the times the gardens are surrounded by canals. In William's time, there wasn't all the woods which are there now, but it was mainly sand, and they were probably built to keep the sand out.
I see.
And another advantage was, of course, when you walk on the terraces, you have a good view on the parterres and on the layout of the garden.
Yes, I think these 17th century landscapes are better appreciated if you can look down on them.
On it, yes,
Right.
yes.
Yeah.
That's why here, for instance, from the roof of the palace, you have a very good view of the garden.
Gardens of this design and scale required tremendous resources of money and labor to maintain. This was a place where the king could show off a bit, entertain guests and heads of states. But even with all of this exuberance, a visitor like me can always take away ideas that I can use in my small garden. Another example of how gardens like these continue to inspire me is the use of this hedge and the way they've clipped it into a magnificent arbor. You see, this entire structure was built in the Queen's Garden here at Hetlow, and it was used for ladies to walk in the shade in the afternoon. The plant they've used here is European hornbeam. It's very suitable for pruning. It's hard to believe that this garden is less than 20 years old. It's a beautiful and meticulous restoration of a 17th century garden. Everything we saw here today, you could have seen then. When it comes to gathering ideas for my own garden, it's always easier for me to borrow a few ideas from the past rather than constantly reinventing the wheel. While in Holland, I just couldn't resist the temptation to visit the country's premier display garden. 2 months out of the year, over 100,000 people visit this garden each week to see a masterful display of flowers unparalleled anywhere on the planet. Here at Kaukenhof Gardens in Holland, the Dutch have done a masterful job painting a beautiful landscape using the country's most famous product, flower bulbs. Peter Koyman, promotions director at Kaukenhof, explains what it takes to create such a masterpiece.
Actually, you should consider it as a cooperative of about 90 growers, export growers. And we do the design at Kaukenhof. We give them a design every year, different one. And they fill in with the bulbs.
Who plants them?
We do. We have 22 gardeners throughout the year. We plant every year a new 6 million bulbs. And if you are a hobbyist and if you love tulips, then this is the place to come. Because one can find about 2,000 different tulips here at Kaukenhof and about 500 different narcissi or daffodils and again 100 different hyacinths. The name Kaukenhof, fortunately, is well known all over the world. And people come here, they love the serenity, the peace, the tranquility, the beauty of the spot.
It is spectacular.
Yeah, it's really called the show window of the Dutch bulb exporter. And that is the case. So it's not only tourism, but also the growers all over the world come here and look at what's available.
The Dutch have been developing their reputation as leaders in the bulb trade for about 400 years. Even today, everyone seems to be involved in some way or the other, whether it's just enjoying the beauty of blooms like these, or involved more directly in the bulb industry itself. No matter what, The Dutch just can't seem to get enough of these beautiful blooms, and I can understand why. The preservation of historic landscapes and gardens can be seen in many parts of the world, but one of the finest examples is in Colonial Williamsburg in Virginia, where an entire 18th century town has been restored, complete with buildings, streets, gardens, and even livestock, just as you would have seen them in the late 1700s. Kent Brinkley has been the landscape architect for Colonial Williamsburg since 1985. He is involved in all aspects of how the landscape of this historic place is interpreted and presented to the public.
In 1699, when the capital was moved from Jamestown to Middle Plantation, the town was created and it was named after King William of Orange, who was the monarch on the throne at the time, along with Queen Mary.
Of course, he was Dutch by descent.
Correct.
And became an English king. Are there Dutch influences here in Williamsburg?
Certainly. The style of gardening in a couple of places, particularly the Governor's Palace, reflects the early style of gardening that was then in vogue in England, of course copied from the Dutch styles of gardening. The palace was started in 1706, which of course was early in the reign of William and Mary, and you can see the influence of the Dutch style in the architecture as well as in the way the gardens were laid out. This style of gardening was all the rage, and it was characterized by rigid geometry, plants arranged in parterres, which is a design on the ground, picked out in plants or inert materials, and also the use of topiary as vertical accents in the garden.
And best seen from above.
True. You can see the designs, you can appreciate the designs from the second floor window or even perhaps up on the roof of buildings looking down. The whole structure of the palace and the way that it's set up is a series of sequences. You arrive, you go through the grand front gates, and it was all intended to impress the visitor with the power and might of the crown. That theme carried through not only the interior furnishings, but once you went through the back door of the ballroom wing into the gardens. And this was probably the epitome of the gardener's art in the colony of Virginia in the 18th century, and that was the intent. These gardens play a vital role in helping people understand, and not just the gardens, but the landscape at large, what we call the macro landscape. You can read about them in a book and you can get one level of understanding, but I think that it's important to walk through those spaces. To fully engage the landscape is really important, and I think it imparts a degree of reality and an immediacy that you can't get in any other way. So I think that when they conceived of a recreated Williamsburg, certainly were attuned to the importance of being able to physically and visually experience this place, to be able to walk through it and sort of suspend reality for a bit and put yourself back into 200 years ago, 250 years ago, and to think about life as it was lived. I think that's a very, very important thing, and it has a validity all its own, which hopefully people still appreciate today.
Preserving the past is important because we learn so much about how our ancestors lived. There's a simple way you can become involved with keeping the past alive, and that's by saving heritage or threatened varieties of seed and passing them along. These basket flowers were spectacular just a few weeks ago. Since the seed is difficult to find, I save as many as I can. After the flowers fade and the seed pods dry like this, I break them off and sort out the seed. Whether it's basket flower or any other flower, I like to take the seed heads and place them on newspaper in a tray. As they dry, the seed begin to fall, and then I store them in these little film canisters and label them for planting in the spring. I save seed from a wide range of my old garden standbys, everything that's not a hybrid. Things such as my Formosa lily, verbena on a stick, and even flowering tobacco. One of the nice things about saving seed is that you may preserve an heirloom strain that's no longer commercially available. So by spending a little time in the garden gathering seed, we may keep some of our favorite garden flowers from being lost forever. You may be wondering what all the excitement's about. Well, this is a parade in honor of a very special dignitary that comes here once a year. You see, they're so important that the whole town has come out to celebrate their arrival.
Butterfly, butterfly, flutter by. Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. Butterfly, flutter by. Sometimes it works. Can I really fly? Last time I remember, I was a little caterpillar. I'm going to have to check these out and do a test flight and see if I can fly. And it tests them out and it says, I can. I'm not a caterpillar anymore. Now I'm a butterfly. I'm going to go find a purple flower and drink the nectar because I can fly. Okay. So that's how a brand new butterfly is born. You're welcome.
In addition to educating children about the life cycle of butterflies, Ro Vaquero of Pacific Grove, California, has fought the good fight to preserve an important part of the monarch butterfly's habitat.
They particularly like eucalyptus trees, and in California that's what most of the habitats are made of. What happened is in November of 1990, we suddenly realized that the property owner who owned these trees at the time had a subdivision approval to cut down all of the butterfly trees and build condominiums in here, and we couldn't let that happen. Friends of the Monarch spearheaded a campaign to put a ballot argument in front of the people for a tax measure to buy the property for the city and turned it into a city park. And we were so proud of the people of Pacific Grove. 69% of them said, yes, go ahead.
Wonderful.
Tax me. We've got to save the butterflies. We take butterflies very seriously here. This is Butterfly Town, USA, and we've had a city ordinance on our books since 1938 that there's a $1,000 fine for molesting a butterfly in any way. Monarch butterflies, any kind of butterfly, is a symbol of hope, renewal, rebirth, resurrection, and like rainbows, it's one of those hopeful symbols that just the thought of them makes you smile. The sight of them makes you glow.
We can't do without them.
No. I've had some wonderful questions from little kids. Probably my favorite question came from a little boy about 6 years old. I'd answered everything I could answer for everybody, and I said, any other questions? And he said, what are they thinking up there?
Preservation. It can be a difficult task, but as we've seen in today's show, it can take many forms. Sometimes it takes the resolve and wealth of an entire nation to preserve and restore its past. Sometimes it takes the vision and hard work of a group of dedicated people to help preserve a piece of American history. And last, but certainly not least, we should never underestimate the determination of an individual like Ro Vaquero, who helped to rally the support of her community to keep one small part of the world just as it should be for both man and nature. You know what's interesting is that monarch butterfly, because of its beautiful bright orange color and black outline, was named after King William of Orange. Isn't it interesting how through the garden so many connections can be made? From the garden, I'm Alan Smith.
In this garden I dream of a bed of flowers. Bluebirds sing of the beauty all around us. And every time the sun comes out, I can't help but smile. Oh, no, I can't help but smile.